companies learning to take advantage of the changing behaviour of customers. They can contribute to overall economic growth wherever they operate if they do it well. And that's according to Accenture's latest report on the changing consumer. And with us now is Grant Hatch, who is Managing Director for Strategy at Accenture, to tell us about your survey here, Energising Global Growth, Understanding the Changing Consumer. I mean, this, I suppose, is a grail in a way. If you can really understand the changing consumer, you're going to make a lot of money.
Yes, that's right, David. I mean, it comes in the context of, you look what stock markets are pricing in terms of growth. Where's that growth going to come from?
So this consumer, who is he or she? How many of them are there? How do you differentiate them?
Well, the survey, the report's based on an online survey of 10,000 online consumers worldwide, so it included South Africa in that survey. So you need to bear in mind it's only those that are using the internet currently. What it showed is that in emerging markets in particular, 3 in 4 people who responded said they intend using the internet to look at products and services, transact, research products and information more over the last few years than they have in the past.
But they would do that if they're on the internet.
Exactly.
I mean, if they're access to the online, then they would be doing that, wouldn't they?
But I think the significance is what you're likely to see in South Africa in the sort of fixed environment, greater uptake of internet penetration, and particularly, this is the relevance for Africa, is much greater mobile penetration and access to mobile. And so what we're going to see is an increasing trend towards connectedness by consumers. Very big emerging trend.
What I've never understood is the contribution of online retailing to GDP. So in markets like Europe and the United States, what's that number in order to gauge what the potential could be for South Africa?
I think what you've got to be careful in trying to make those comparisons is looking at the structure of the market. I mean, one of the things that we look at is that, if you look at those markets which are mature, the bulk of people, I mean, internet penetration is close to 100%. There's very formalized markets developed. Even in South Africa, you've got a large number of people, what we call basic survivors and working families, that have very limited internet access. They're more likely to use their mobile phones. You move north into Africa, that number of people diminishes even further. The structure of those populations fundamentally is that the bulk of the people are basic survivors. You look at Nigeria, for example, 170 million people, but 92% of them are in the basic survivor, working family, lower category that earn basically just enough to buy subsistence products.
Yeah, and we've made the point before that this kind of technology means the whole fixed line market for the lower end will never exist, actually.
They've
just bypassed it. They don't need it. Wayne, if in terms of when you're looking at consumer stocks, retail exposed stocks, what sort of information are you wanting from a survey like this?
Well, look, it's always difficult to take it from any information from a survey, because in surveys people will express certain intentions that don't in fact materialize because circumstances change, incomes change, etc., etc. But if you look at what the announcement's done today by a few micro lenders saying, listen, watch out for this micro lending environment. We have seen the best of the years. We will probably avoid a disaster. So I suppose the information I'd like to get is, in what real state is the consumer? How indebted is the South African consumer? Obviously, this is a global survey, but that would help me tremendously in evaluating retail shares.
Well, Grant?
I think you raise a key point. I think the South African consumer is well indebted, and that's part of the problem, which is affecting retail spending, and it has impacts on available consumer spending. I think what is interesting is, in comparison, if you look at African markets, you don't have the same indebtedness. You have admittedly much poorer populations, but they've got a much greater amount of disposable cash to actually spend, which is why South African companies are actively expanding north into Africa.
Isn't there also, you go around the street, as my father always used to say when he saw the results of surveys, he said, they never asked me. Who do they ask for these surveys? They never asked me. You go out and you look at the malls at Christmas, people say, oh, it's not going to be as good at Christmas, but people are shopping. You get a famous brand that delivers these powerful numbers, but the others as well. The ShopRite numbers indicated that the expectations of growth have been so big, but there's still growth. Consumers are still spending. It's not like it's static.
Well, I think what that report highlights, and it's really what retailers in South Africa could continuously do, is innovate. So as you see the market changing, I mean, the report highlights, it included 600 CEOs globally, is that, 3/4 of them expect radical change in the industry. So the question is how adapt and how our companies are able to respond to that. And I think that's where you're seeing we're not expecting necessarily huge growth, but actually replacement of growth by innovative ideas and approaches that companies follow. And that's really the critical part.
Now, maybe your survey didn't do this because you say it's online, but there's been more and more information about the hidden economy, the cash economy, building in rural areas, for example. Companies like Cashbuild have done very well, and they shouldn't be. The consumer's supposed to be strapped. So of what value is your online consumer if in South Africa we've got all these non-online consumers?
Well, I mean, again, that's right. I mean, the online consumer in South Africa is still relatively small but growing. To your point,
What
you made-
percentage roughly?
I mean, I don't know what it is, but I mean, it's going to be small. I mean, I'd guess it's probably about 10% of sort of retail at most. I mean, it's much less. I think the point you raise about the non-online shopper is actually quite key, because if you look at rural areas, and interestingly, the focus of growth into Africa ignores the fact that there's still very strong growth in rural markets in South Africa, which is why retailers are still penetrating those markets, still very good opportunities, and very good ways of penetrating markets with new innovative products. You see JD Group going to car selling, for example, at the low end. Those kind of ideas. Finding companies adapting to changing market conditions.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's really critical. I think the implication of that is, and the big question is, how are those organizations structured internally to be able to deliver that? So if they're going to start delivering food or clothing online and online shopping in South Africa, what is the organizational structure of the company to deliver that?
Is there a demographic bias in this study that points to a certain age group, if not gender group, I guess?
No, what the survey basically was more interested in trends across countries. We haven't broken it by the sort of demographics or even the sectors within countries yet. That's still to be done. I think what's interesting is that if you look at there's marked differences that you'd expect between developing and developed countries. Typically the growth expectations and ability to adapt high in emerging markets. And what's interesting from a South African perspective is South Africa ranks very high and in line with the rest of that survey. So I think we sometimes depress ourselves with concerns about our own outlook, but South Africa, and certainly what CEOs are saying to us in that survey, and admittedly it's a small sample, and forward-looking, that they're optimistic and see growth opportunities. And I think they're saying that because of the growth opportunity they see in Africa, in addition to not just South Africa.